At exactly 7:12 on a Tuesday morning, Arthur Caldwell stood at the counter of a small coffee shop on Maple Street, holding a paper cup that cost $2.89. The barista tapped the screen twice, then looked up with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry, sir. Says your card was declined." Arthur frowned. "That's strange. Try it again." She did. Another beep. Declined. A man behind him shifted his weight. A woman further back sighed loud enough for the whole shop to hear. Arthur reached into his wallet and pulled out a second card. This one should work. Didn't. The barista looked embarrassed on his behalf. "I'm really sorry." Heat rose into Arthur's face, and it had nothing to do with the price of a cup of coffee. It was the quiet, sinking feeling every person over 70 comes to know eventually. That invisible moment when strangers start wondering if you've become confused, forgetful, incapable. "It's all right," he said quietly. "I'll come back another time." He left the coffee on the counter and stepped out into the cool morning air, the traffic rolling by as if nothing in the world had changed. Then he called his son. Nathan picked up on the second ring. "Morning, Dad. My cards were declined." A pause. Then, almost too casually, "Yeah, we canceled them. Been meaning to talk to you about it." Arthur's grip tightened on the phone. "You what?" "We canceled your credit cards, Dad. You're 72. You've been forgetting things. We thought it was time to simplify." "I haven't forgotten anything." In the background, he heard his daughter-in-law's voice, not whispering, wanting to be heard. "I told you he'd react like this." Then she took the phone. "Hi, Arthur." Vanessa's laugh was short, dismissive, the kind that made his stomach fold in on itself. "If you need money, just ask us first. It'll be easier for everyone." Everyone. Not him. Everyone else. Arthur looked through the windshield at people walking into the coffee shop with laptops and gym bags, their mornings continuing exactly as planned. His own morning had just quietly ended and a different one had begun in its place. He could have argued. He could have shouted into the phone until his throat gave out. Instead, he said 4 words. "I understand. Thank you." Then he hung up and drove straight to the bank. Not home. He'd lived in the same house on Larkspur Lane for 34 years. He and his late wife, Eleanor, had bought the brick 2-story back when interest rates were brutal and a promise still meant something. They'd raised one son under that roof, celebrated every birthday and graduation and quiet Tuesday in between. Eleanor had been gone 3 years now, taken by ALS in a slow and merciless unraveling that had stolen her voice long before it took the rest of her. Some mornings Arthur still reached across the bed before remembering. Grief didn't disappear. It just learned to whisper instead of shout. After retiring from a long career as a structural engineer, Arthur had built a routine that gave his days shape: coffee, the newspaper, sometimes a walk past the old rail yard, lunch on Thursdays with a former colleague. Nathan lived 20 minutes away with Vanessa and their 2 children, and from the outside, the Caldwells looked like a family that had gotten it right. Sunday calls, holiday dinners, photographs on the mantle. 8 months earlier, Nathan had offered to help modernize his father's finances. He'd connected the bank accounts to a new app, set up automatic payments, changed the passwords himself. "It'll protect you from scams," he'd said. Vanessa had agreed instantly. So many seniors get taken advantage of these days. It had sounded reasonable. Arthur had trusted him because Nathan was his son, and because trust between a father and his only child is supposed to be the one thing in life that doesn't require an audit. He was wrong. The bank manager, Renata Cole, had known Arthur for almost 15 years, and the moment she saw his face, she knew something was wrong. 10 minutes later, they were sitting in her office while she pulled up his account. Her expression shifted. First confusion, then something closer to alarm. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm seeing several recent changes." She turned the monitor toward him. "Your mailing address was updated yesterday." It wasn't his address. It was Nathan's. The phone number on file was also changed. Nathan's number again. And the email, Vanessa's email. When did this happen? Yesterday afternoon. Replacement cards were mailed out the same day to the new address. I never requested replacement cards. Renata's hands went still on the keyboard. Did you authorize any of these changes? No. She picked up the phone without another word and asked for someone from fraud services. 20 minutes later, a soft-spoken investigator named Marcus Delaney sat across from them with a tablet and a folder of printed pages and began walking Arthur through 8 months of quiet, incremental theft dressed up as help, online credentials reset, fraud alerts redirected to Nathan's phone, spending limits lowered, without Arthur's knowledge, to $500 a month on an account that had once managed multi-million-dollar construction budgets. Authorization forms bearing Arthur's signature, dated for meetings that had never taken place. Can signatures be forged? Arthur asked, staring at his own name written in a hand that wasn't his. It's one possibility, Marcus said carefully. Sometimes these things don't happen all at once, Mr. Caldwell. They happen one small step at a time. For the first time all morning, Arthur stopped thinking about the coffee. It had never been about $2.89. It had been the first crack in a wall someone else had spent months quietly building around him. And he had no idea yet how much of his life already stood on the other side of it. He didn't sleep that night. Not from anger. Anger burns hot and loud. What he felt was colder than that. He sat in his living room with the television muted, staring at a photograph of Eleanor from the summer before her diagnosis. Paint on the tip of her nose from a brush he'd flicked at her on the porch. She used to tell him, when something doesn't make sense, don't rush to fix it. First, understand it. She'd been right about most things, so he decided he wouldn't call Nathan. Not yet. 30 years designing bridges had taught him one rule above all others. You never repair a structure until you understand exactly why it cracked. The next morning he sat with Marcus again, this time reviewing a full timeline stretching back 8 months. A secondary contact added, then another. Alerts quietly rerouted. Spending caps lowered without notice. Every change, taken alone, sounded almost reasonable. Together, they formed something else entirely. We found no evidence that money has been stolen, Renata said gently. Then what is this? She chose her words with care. It looks like increasing control. Control, not robbery. The word followed Arthur home and rearranged every memory he touched along the way. Last Thanksgiving, Vanessa insisting on paying the restaurant bill before he could reach for his wallet. You've done enough for this family. And then, almost offhand, asterisk, are you still carrying around all those cards? Must be confusing. Asterisk, at the time it had felt like kindness. Now it felt like reconnaissance. By Thursday, Arthur was sitting across from Preston Doyle, the attorney who had drafted his and Eleanor's wills 15 years earlier. An old-fashioned man who still kept paper files and drove a truck older than his practice. Preston reviewed everything without interrupting, then removed his glasses. Something isn't right, he said. These authorization forms reference conversations that supposedly happened in my office. They never did. I wasn't involved. Silence settled over the room. What do I do? Arthur asked. Nothing. Don't confront your son. Why not? Because if someone believes they've already won, Arthur, they stop hiding what they're doing. People get careless once they think the fight is over. Then, almost as an afterthought, has anyone mentioned assisted living to you recently? Arthur froze. Why would you ask that? Answer the question. A few times. Vanessa, casually after church at a birthday party, always framed as concern. Preston nodded slowly, like a man confirming something he'd already suspected. Sometimes financial control is the first step towards something bigger, like a legal declaration that someone can no longer manage their own affairs. That night, Arthur drove home a different way, past a retirement community with white rocking chairs and manicured walking paths. Nothing wrong with the place, except that 6 weeks earlier, Vanessa had handed him a glossy brochure for it. Just thought you'd like to look. He hadn't opened it. Now he wondered how long the pressure had been there, simply wearing an invisible coat. Friday morning, Preston called with worse news. Nathan had been in contact with a real estate agent, quietly asking what homes in the neighborhood were selling for. Not illegal, not yet a crime, just a man who already believed the outcome was decided, gathering information for a future he had never once discussed with his father. Arthur sat alone at his kitchen table that evening, the same table where he and Eleanor had once balanced a checkbook down to the penny, where Nathan had struggled through algebra while cookies baked in the oven. This had stopped being about money. It had become about the quiet, devastating discovery that someone he had spent a lifetime protecting had decided, without ever asking, that he no longer deserved a say in his own life. The following Monday, Preston delivered the final piece. I believe they may already be preparing paperwork questioning your competency. Outside the window, the flag Eleanor had insisted on flying every summer stirred in the breeze. Arthur understood, finally, that this wasn't a family disagreement. It was a race, and one careless move could cost him far more than a declined credit card. For now, Preston said, let them believe exactly what they already believe. You mean act like I don't know? It's strategic. If they think you figured it out, they'll go quiet, delete records, start covering tracks. If they think you haven't, they'll keep behaving naturally, and people reveal everything through ordinary behavior that they'd never admit under direct questioning. It was the hardest performance of Arthur's life. When Nathan called that afternoon, cheerful and relieved, saying, "Don't worry about the cards, Dad. Everything's under control," Arthur made himself answer warmly, "I appreciate you looking out for me." Nathan laughed, satisfied. Knew you'd understand. The hardest part wasn't the lying. It was hearing his own son mistake silence for surrender. Over the following weeks, Arthur played the role they expected of him, calling before purchases he didn't need permission for, just to watch how Nathan responded. Asterisk, why don't we talk about it first? Asterisk, as though Arthur were a teenager asking to borrow the car. Mentioning a fishing trip and watching Vanessa's face tighten with manufactured worry. Asterisk, do you think that's safe? Asterisk, he'd been fishing for 50 years. Every conversation alone sounded reasonable. Stacked together, they pointed toward the same destination. A smaller life, fewer choices, less of a voice. On Preston's advice, Arthur started a notebook. Dates, times, exact wording. Every decision made for him without being asked went into it. Control, he was learning, rarely announces itself. It arrives disguised as convenience. Then the accidents of ordinary small-town life began working in his favor. At the hardware store, an old friend named Gordon Price asked when Arthur was moving. Nathan had told him weeks ago that the house would probably sell before winter. Arthur forced a smile and said nothing had been decided, and drove home with his stomach in knots. His son wasn't only planning. He was telling other people the plan was already settled, without ever once asking the man whose name was on the deed. Days later, his neighbor, a retired probate judge named Roland Ashford, who had lived next door since before Nathan was born, caught him at the curb. "I had lunch with Gordon," Roland said. "Everything all right?" For once, Arthur didn't say fine. He told him everything. Roland listened without interrupting, then folded his arms. "I saw cases like this for 30 years on the bench. Good intentions curdle into entitlement slowly, Arthur. Families convince themselves they're helping while they take away someone's voice, one decision at a time." He handed over a business card. "Adele Whitfield, best elder law attorney I ever saw argue in my courtroom. She specializes in exactly one thing, protecting competent adults from being treated like they aren't." That evening, Preston called with something close to excitement in his voice. A document Nathan had sent to a financial advisor had been accidentally copied to the wrong email address. Preston's own firm, as it turned out, since Preston had once represented that same advisor years before. The subject line read, "Dad doesn't know yet." Those 4 words followed Arthur for the rest of the night. Maybe they believed he was confused. Maybe they believed they were protecting him. But one thing had become unmistakable. They were making plans for his future as though he'd already been erased from the conversation. By June, Arthur's life had split cleanly into 2 versions of the same man. In one, he was simply Arthur Caldwell, retired engineer, church on Sundays, grandchildren on weekends. In the other, he was quietly, methodically assembling a record against his own son. He hated every hour of it. But Preston reminded him often, *, you're not building a case against Nathan. You're building a record of the truth. *, one sought punishment. The other sought clarity. That distinction was the only thing keeping bitterness from taking root where love used to live. Adele Whitfield turned out to be exactly as precise as Roland promised. She asked Arthur one question that mattered more than any other. Had a doctor ever diagnosed him with any cognitive impairment? No. When was his last physical? 3 months ago. Clean bill of health. Save for a doctor's suggestion to walk more and eat less pie. For the first time in weeks, Arthur saw someone smile at him without an agenda underneath it. You're fully capable of making your own decisions, Adele said. The challenge isn't convincing yourself of that. It's proving it if someone ever questions it in a room where it counts. Over the following weeks, Adele and Preston built a binder. Not a story, a record. Every password reset, every redirected alert, every forged signature, every quiet withdrawal of Arthur's own authority over his own life, laid out with dates and documents and nothing exaggerated. Facts don't need to shout, Adele told him, sliding the finished binder across the table. Meanwhile, Nathan and Vanessa kept playing the devoted children role in public. At church, Vanessa carried Arthur's Bible for him and told anyone who'd listen how much they worried about him. Friends told Arthur how lucky he was. He smiled back and said quietly that they'd certainly been involved. It wasn't a lie. It also wasn't the whole truth, and increasingly Arthur suspected Nathan believed his own performance completely, which hurt worse than if he hadn't. If Nathan truly believed he was helping, it meant somewhere along the way he'd stopped seeing his father as a person and started seeing him as a problem to be managed. His granddaughter, Lily, 11 years old, noticed more than any adult gave her credit for. Why does Mommy always ask Daddy if you remembered your medicine? She asked one afternoon, coloring at the kitchen table. I don't think you're forgetful. Arthur told her that grown-ups worry too much sometimes, and watched her go back to her crayons, promising himself silently that whatever happened next, his grandchildren would not become collateral damage in it. One evening Nathan stopped by with a folder of glossy brochures for senior communities. Gardens, fitness rooms, dining halls. You'd really like these places, Dad. I'm happy here. This house is getting harder to maintain. It isn't. You wouldn't have to shovel snow. I've survived 50 Ohio winters. Nathan smiled, the patient smile of a man who has already decided the outcome. I just want you somewhere safer. Safer. Another reasonable word. Another brick quietly pulled from underneath him. And what happens to this house? Arthur asked. We'd figure that out. We. Not you. We. That night, under the date in his notebook, Arthur wrote 4 words. He assumes agreement. A week later, Preston and Adele finished the new estate plan. 3 hours of reviewing every account, every asset, every safeguard. Arthur's home would be placed in a trust that could not be touched without his approval while he remained competent, and could only be reassigned through the agreement of multiple independent physicians and a licensed fiduciary with no personal stake in the outcome. Not Nathan, not Vanessa, not anyone standing to gain from the decision. This protects your wishes, Adele said as he signed. It also protects your family, Arthur answered. Sometimes, she said, those are the same thing. Then came the part that surprised even Arthur himself. I want everyone together, he told Preston. Nathan and Vanessa. You, Adele. Renata from the bank. Marcus. Preston raised an eyebrow. That's quite a dinner party. Arthur allowed himself a small, tired smile. It won't be a party. No, Preston agreed. It won't be. Sunday dinner. Nathan and Vanessa arrived carrying a homemade pie, all warmth and ease, until they stepped into the dining room and found it already full. Preston, Adele, Renata, Marcus, extra chairs pulled up around the table Arthur had eaten 1,000 ordinary meals at. Nathan's easy smile faltered. Vanessa's tightened. What's all this? Nathan asked. Please, Arthur said. Sit down. When everyone had settled, Nathan looked around the table and then back at his father with the same confident smile he'd worn for months. Dad, have you finally decided to let us handle everything? Arthur met his eyes. Yes. Relief spread across Nathan's face. Under the table, Vanessa squeezed his hand, certain Arthur hadn't noticed. He noticed everything now. I think that's the right decision, Dad. So do I, Arthur said. Before we eat, I'd like to thank you both. You don't have to thank us, Vanessa said. We're family. You taught me something important, Arthur told his son. You taught me how easily good intentions curdle into control. He set a blue binder gently in the center of the table. No one's in trouble. This is the story of the last 8 months. He opened it and turned the pages one at a time. The reset credentials Nathan had arranged, the redirected fraud alerts, the lowered spending limits Arthur had never been told about, the forged authorization forms. Nathan's protests came slower each time. I helped you with that, so I could protect you. Until Renata quietly noted the bank had never informed Arthur of the changes, and Marcus added, without raising his voice, that helping usually involves telling the person you're helping. Facts, delivered calmly, carried a weight that arguments never could. When Preston asked Nathan directly whether Arthur had ever asked for his address changed, his cards canceled, his alerts redirected, the answer 3 times was no. Nathan turned to Vanessa. I thought you'd talk to him about all of this. She stared back, genuinely startled. I thought you had. You told me you agreed with him. I mentioned it. Mentioning isn't the same as asking. Something in Arthur broke quietly in that moment. Not from betrayal, but from the realization that his son hadn't been driving this. He had simply stopped asking questions. That was almost worse. Adele asked Nathan gently when he'd first started believing his father couldn't manage his own life. He thought a long time before answering. After Mom died, he seemed lonely. He forgot to return a library book. Mixed up one appointment. Asked me how to use the banking app because the technology had changed. And what did those little things become? Nathan closed his eyes. Evidence. Were they? No, he whispered. They were assumptions. Arthur walked into the kitchen for a moment and looked out at the yard. At the bird feeder Eleanor had hung years before a cardinal had ever landed on the fence outside. He came back carrying an old photo album, open to a picture of Nathan at 9, standing proudly beside a Pinewood Derby car they'd built together, staying in the garage until midnight to get the wheels straight. You never gave up on that car, Arthur said. Neither did you. He closed the album. When did you decide I deserved less patience than you did? Nathan's eyes filled. Dad? No. I really want to know. He couldn't answer. Neither could Vanessa. Nathan stood, his chair scraping against the floor. I'm sorry. No excuses. I honestly believed I was protecting you. I never wanted your money, he added, and Arthur believed him. I thought if I handled everything, nothing bad could happen. Instead, Arthur said quietly, you made something bad happen. Tears ran freely down his son's face. Vanessa reached for him and he pulled away. Not in anger, in something closer to clarity. No more, he said, and turned back to his father. I should have talked to you. I should have trusted you. I stopped seeing you as my father. I started seeing you as someone I needed to manage. Vanessa lowered her eyes and admitted, almost too quietly to hear, that she'd confused efficiency with kindness. Nobody argued with her. There wasn't anything left to argue. Preston finally explained the new estate plan aloud. Control returned entirely to Arthur, Any future determination of incapacity requiring two independent physicians and transfer of authority only through a licensed fiduciary with no personal stake, never directly to a family member. So no one in the family controls it, Nathan said slowly. Correct. You don't trust us, Vanessa said. No, Arthur answered simply. I don't trust any one person with unchecked power over another. Not you. Not Nathan. Not even myself. That's why we built safeguards instead of assumptions. He explained that the house had been placed in a trust that could never be sold without his approval while he was competent. Not because the property held market value, but because it held his whole life inside its walls. The pencil marks in the hallway measuring every birthday. The oak tree planted the week Nathan was born. A stranger sees real estate, Arthur said. I see my life. Then he set down one more folder, nothing to do with inheritance at all. A small fund, self-financed, to sponsor free financial literacy workshops at the community library, teaching older adults how online banking and digital security actually worked, so no one else would ever feel too embarrassed to ask a question and hand over control instead. Renata offered the bank's participation on the spot. Marcus volunteered the fraud team. Preston offered to teach a session on powers of attorney. Arthur thought, quietly, that Eleanor would have loved watching something painful get turned into something useful. It had always been her way. The months that followed weren't simple ones. Trust doesn't return because someone says sorry. It returns because behavior changes. Nathan called less often, not from avoidance, but because he'd finally learned to ask instead of assume. One Saturday he arrived with a toolbox, noticed the porch railing was loose, and, for the first time in a year, actually asked, "Would you like me to fix it?" "I'd appreciate that." One sentence, one question, felt like an entirely different relationship. Vanessa took longer and did it in ink instead of arguments. A handwritten letter admitting she'd grown up watching her own family struggle after a grandparent's decline, and had carried the wrong lesson forward. That taking over sooner always meant less suffering later. She'd confused preparation with permission, protection with control. She didn't ask Arthur to erase what had happened. That, more than any apology, was what let forgiveness finally take root. Nearly a year to the day after that first Tuesday morning, Arthur woke before sunrise and drove, out of habit, to the same coffee shop. The same barista looked up, and her face broke into recognition. "I remember you. I was hoping you wouldn't," he said, and she laughed. The coffee was still $2.89. He slid his card into the reader. Approved. No hesitation. No decline. Just a single quiet beep. That Nathan had followed him, their Sunday breakfasts having become a habit neither of them wanted to break. He reached for his wallet. "Let me get this one." Arthur looked at the card already back in his pocket and smiled. "No, I got it, Dad. I know you mean well." He patted his son's shoulder. "I've got this." Nathan smiled. Not the confident smile of a man taking charge, but the grateful smile of a son who had finally learned the difference between helping someone and controlling them. They walked out together into the morning light, not as a man being managed and not as a son trying to manage him. Just as a father and a son, arriving, a little later than either of them would have liked, at the understanding that love without respect eventually curdles into control, but love paired with respect becomes family again. It had cost $2.89 to expose 8 months of silent assumptions, quiet fear, and good intentions gone quietly wrong. Sometimes the smallest moments reveal the largest truths. Growing older doesn't mean surrendering your dignity. Needing help doesn't mean surrendering your voice. And if you truly love someone, you don't quietly take their independence from them. You stand beside them, ask what they need, and honor whatever they answer.